Let me ask you something. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, did you ever really choose music freely? Or did you just choose whatever was already put in front of you? Because when I think back on it, music wasn't really organized around discovery. It was organized around control. Record stores had aisles, radio had formats, MTV had blocks. And depending on what you were into, you basically lived inside one of those lanes. Metal kids stayed in metal, rap kids stayed in rap. Punk kids stayed in punk. Alternative kids floated around in between but still had their own section. And nobody really questioned it at the time because that's just how it worked. So this episode is kind of an extension of the last video I posted. That video was about artists who spent their careers fighting categorization, that fought the industry. It was people like Frank Zappa, MacKaye, Jello Biafra, and Mike Patton. And the reason that I came up with that group, it really started with Mike Patton. So I'm really a big fan of Patton. But I always associated him with Zappa and Biafra. They just seem like-minded. And MacKaye really seemed to balance that grouping out. And one of the responses that I got to that video was interesting. One comment basically said, the thesis was good, but the editing made it hard to follow. And I think that's a fair point because the video was chaotic. But the point underneath it wasn't chaos for chaos sake. It was about how the system itself creates chaos when you try to step outside of it. But what I realized after the fact is something that I didn't fully say in that video, that those same systems weren't just shaping artists, they were shaping us as fans too. So the video, I understand, I've toned down, some of the chaos, and I think that's, as a creator, you have to be mindful of your message and your art and the combination of the two, and I respect that. So like I said, those same systems weren't just shaping artists, they were shaping us as fans, and we're going to talk about that next. The music industry is about the industry more than the music. The industry was never just about the artists. When people talk about genres, they usually talk about them like they're natural things, like metal is made out of metal, or punk is made out of punk, I guess, and rap is rap. You get the point, but that's not really how it worked. Genres were industry tools, they were designed to organize through radio stations, record stores, MTV programming, malls, Walmart, marketing budgets, things like that. They weren't really designed to explain music. They were designed to contain it, package it, market it, sell it. And when you grow up in that system, you don't really notice it. You just assume that's how music is supposed to be structured. But that's not how it felt as a fan. If you lived inside of it, it didn't feel like categories. It felt like identity. You weren't just listening to metal, you were a metal kid. You weren't just listening to a rap album, you were a rap kid. And that identity came with everything else. Style, clothes, friends, shows, movies, even where you hung out sometimes, or didn't hang out. It wasn't just music. It was a lane that you existed in. And that's where the industry made a mistake and built subculture. Not just genre separation, but cultural separation. And that's where the artists from the video come in. Because the reason people like Zappa, MacKaye, Jello, Patton mattered, it's not just because they were different. It's because they broke out of those systems and maybe what they represent. But here's the part I think gets missed. When they break out of those systems, fans had to break out too, or at least learn how to move through the cracks, so to speak. Because if something wasn't in the main aisle, you had to go somewhere else to find it. And this is where it gets interesting, because discovery wasn't passive back then. You didn't just scroll. You had to really search manually. You'd hear about a band from an interview, passing by the television, or in the back of a magazine, or you'd see a shirt, or notice a name in the liner notes. You'd catch an opening act, either live or on TV, a VHS. Stumble into something in a used bin, in tape, CDs, cassettes, whatever, depending on the timing. It was all indirect. Everything pointed to something else, and you followed it. And once you started following it, you realized music wasn't actually divided the way stores made it look. Everything was really connected. Hip-hop especially worked like this. Sampling basically turned albums into discovery engines. You'd hear a beat, you'd trace the sample, and then you'd find the original artist. Then that artist leads you somewhere else. And then you'd hear the same sample, and then another sample, and then layered on another sample. And anyways, it just goes on. It's basically scrolling before scrolling existed. But slower, more physical, generally accidental, and honestly more rewarding, because every discovery felt like you earned it. I think it's sometimes forgotten that this wasn't just the underground culture generating discovery. Mainstream bands were a big part of it. Metallica wearing Faith No More shirts. They were wearing Misfits shirts. They helped lead to the discovery of a lot of bands, the way that they covered, a lot of the bands that influenced them. I think a lot of those are pretty well known. We'll talk more about that later. Anthrax, their crossover with Public Enemy, of course. The Beastie Boys sampling a lot of classic rock and hard rock. There wasn't a clean separation here between mainstream, underground, and everything in between. That separation, I think, mostly existed in marketing, not in real listening habits. People were already mixing everything. The system just didn't reflect that yet. Control versus chaos. So when I say control versus chaos, I don't just mean artists fighting the labels. I mean the entire structure of music at the time. The industry needed control. Categories, formats, lanes, demographics. But listeners created a lot of chaos by mixing genres and flowing the connections, jumping scenes, and basically ignoring the rules, ignoring the categories. And that tension is what really helped shape the whole era. Mixtapes were a good example of that. College radio, a lot of what was going on in various underground scenes. Okay, here's a quick segment. This is World News, Jake World News, music news. Not really news, just things happening in music that feel somewhat connected to things that we've been talking about. So Devil Driver, they announced a new album, dropped a track, Dig Your Own Grave. It's really good. Give it a listen. At the 30-second mark, it really bangs, especially if you've got headphones in. It's sounding really good, and like their earlier stuff is what I'm reading in the comments section. Massive Attack dropped a track with Tom Waits, just picture what that sounds like, and you're probably right on. And it's pretty heavy. Give it a listen if that's your thing. Valo said in Metal Hammer they'd be basically open to a reunion with him. So now that Bam's got his stuff together and him maybe getting back together, who knows what happens next. The idea of reunions and reboots, it just never ends. But some good news, even though the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is not about rock and roll, I think we all can agree on that. But Wu-Tang is in there, so they deserve it, and Wu-Tang getting inducted to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, well deserved. It's appropriate. Kind of proves the point, because at some point the categories stop making sense. Iron Maiden got in as well, and everything just gets absorbed into whatever system is left. Rock and roll, hip hop, hall, doesn't really matter. It's all just legacy at this point. And then probably the most unexpected thing floating around right now, Joey Fatone is producing a documentary on the dark side of boy bands. Can you imagine that there's a dark side of boy bands? I had no idea. Which honestly just feels like a reminder that every category eventually loops back into itself. I mean, the dark side of the industry is not really in metal, is it? Pop turns into nostalgia, and then it turns into something else. And nostalgia turns into a documentary turns into a music video, and suddenly it's liquid television and it's melting, and everything is... No one understands what's going on in the video. And everything is talking about the system it came from. And that's kind of the point, because whether it's metal, trip hop, hip hop, goth rock, or pop documentaries, everything is eventually running into the same structure. The categories don't disappear, they just start bleeding into each other, and that's where the interesting stuff kind of lies. So bringing it back full circle, here's a personal experience I have, because this whole idea isn't just a theory, it's actually how I experience music. When I was putting the video together and working on this podcast, one of the clearest examples for me was discovering the Breeders. I first saw them opening for Nirvana at the Fitchburg Coliseum with the half Japanese, and I had never heard of them before that show, not even once. So before the concert, I went to the local music store and I bought their album on instinct. Just had to hear it. And one of them was Last Splash. I think it had just come out, and Pod was used. I bought them both on CD. And I had heard Cannonball, and I had never heard anything. It wasn't groundbreaking, but it was new and different and just a clean sound, and it clicked immediately. Not just because someone told me it was important or because I saw an ad for it, but because it sounded like it belonged in the same world I was already in. That's the thing. You didn't discover music in isolation. It was through connection points. And, you know, one band leads to another, to a record store, to a whole scene that you didn't even know existed. Remember to share in the comments how you discovered bands, and more on the Breeders coming up on my next video. Stay tuned. So when I think about all this now, the video I made, the comments, this podcast, it all comes back to the same idea. Genres were useful, they helped organize things, but they were never really how music worked. Not for the artists, not for the fans, because once you actually lived inside it, you realized the system was just a maze, and most of the real movement was happening outside of the maze entirely.